Yeah, I think it's 8 o'clock, and welcome to yet another session of case presentation from the Surgical GE Department of SRM Institute of Medical Sciences, Chennai. And to present is my associate, Dr. Gautam Krishnamurthy, a very accomplished surgeon and one who's trained in GA surgery from PGI Chandigarh. And to moderate, we have two eminent people, the pancreatologist, bar transplant surgeon, Ilango, and of course, Prathapan is another very, very renowned pancreatologist. Welcome. And then, see, the acute pancreatitis is something which we see so very often in our clinical practice. And as I've written in the morning, that a large number of them are very simple pancreatitis, they go off, but some of them stay on, and some of them really get stuck on to us, and then they become sickest, and then we have to do a lot of jugglery to get them into a position. Quite often, we have to take the help of interventional radiologists to help us out, and very, very few of them do require surgical intervention nowadays. And then the whole we cannot really predict the course of the disease quite often, especially in the corporate sector. We can't say what will the expenditure like and what will the outcomes like. Actually, frankly speaking, same with chronic pancreatitis. Many chronic pancreatitis also we find the same issue, that there's nothing is very, very clear cut, especially the ones with the recurrent acute pancreatitis over chronic pancreatitis, and there are no clear cut guidelines, and then a number of patients suffering in pain and discomfort. And all. We do give them some comfort, and we ourselves suffer a lot of discomfort in the process. This is not a very clear cut hernia surgery or a gallbladder surgery. So they are done and dusted away. And actually, these conditions, acute and chronic pancreatitis, often throw some very unusual clinical situations where we have to tailor, or we have to sort of do our own treatment protocol. And Gautam has got a series of those, and today we'll be starting with the first case. Over to Gautam. You have to unmute, Gautam.
Good evening, sir. And I thought we'll start the discussion right away because as Sarah already put forth, acute pancreatitis is something which we commonly come across. And there are numerous complications of acute pancreatitis also which we come across. But sometimes we do come across some rare complications arising out of pancreatitis. And given the already deranged physiological status of the patient, multiple septic foci in the individual, an unusual complication can sometimes be very difficult for us to one assess and probably to manage as well. So today we are going to discuss regarding one such patient who had, I would say, recurrent acute pancreatitis related small bowel obstruction. So the index patient is a 32-year-old gentleman who is actually a known case of chronic pancreatitis. 6 months earlier, he had an hospital admission for an abdominal pain, wherein he was told that he was having chronic pancreatitis. And right now, he presented to us with features of abdominal pain for a period of 20 days, typical pancreatic type of pain, and multiple episodes of large volume bilious vomiting. He was not even able to tolerate liquids. This was the brief clinical summary that was there for only 20 days duration. With this clinical symptoms, he had undergone an imaging elsewhere, and he was diagnosed with query superior mesenteric artery syndrome, and then he was referred to us for further management. So on digging his past, we found he was admitted elsewhere. It is in November 2020 for severe abdominal pain. And during that period of evaluation, he told that he did used to get recurrent upper abdominal pain for nearly 2 years duration. An imaging ultrasound that was done during the November admission elsewhere showed an pancreas which was atrophic with parenchymal and ductal calcifications. There was mild prominence of the main pancreatic duct, but peripancreatic fluid collection also present. So basically, the picture was suggestive of an acute on chronic pancreatitis. He was managed conservatively He improved clinically over a period of 5 days and discharged 10 days after 10 days of hospital stay. Coming to the current situation, clinical examination, his BMI was on the lower side, 19, with mild dehydration. There was no pale icterus or pedal edema. His hemodynamics was stable, pulse rate was 75, BP was holding on. Abdomen was soft. When he presented to us, he did have an IV line and IV fluid that was being administered before referring it to us. And he also had a rice tube infusion. Given this background, our first clinical diagnosis was acute pancreatitis related gastroparesis or ileus. Given that we did an CT to have a baseline understanding of what exactly is going on, so far we don't have a cross-sectional imaging done even before. So I'm just putting on the venous face image of the CT scan that was performed. So you can find the stomach grossly distended despite having the rice tube in position. There is note made of multiple collaterals present in the gastrosplenic ligament along the lesser curvature of the stomach. So this is a very grossly atrophic pancreas with multiple calcifications. What is interesting to note was the dilatation was not confined to only the stomach, as we typically see in acute pancreatitis or gastroparesis. The dilatation was extending even beneath it, wherein we could find the D2 also dilated, and even the D3 segment also being dilated.
The number of clicks.
So just a snapshot of images of some relevance. So
you have a comment, Ilango, there? Do you have a comment to make? Ilango?
Sorry, sir. I didn't realize I was not on mute. I was just reading it for myself.
Okay. No, but you can, if you think that.
I let him finish it.
Yeah.
So we have an dilated duodenum up to the level of DJ flexure. We have multiple collaterals on the gastrosplenic lesser curvature, even the omental vessels showed. But what was interesting note is the one on the image on the right hand corner. We can find that after DJ, there is an abrupt narrowing of the jejunum with some amount of mucosal enhancement that is seen in the venous face. So we are basically looking at an mucosal enhancing lesion, which is causing an luminal narrowing and upstream dilatation. Again, to show the T2, D3 segment dilated and the atrophic pancreas. So no way it was like an SMA syndrome. The obstruction was beyond the DJ flexure. There was evidence of collaterals, probably a supramesenteric vein was thrombosed during one of the earlier episodes and was partially recanalized, and the chronicity has caused some collaterals. There was wall thickening of the proximal jejunum with mucosal enhancement, suggestive of choromitotic and inflammatory etiology. So that is where a doubt was created with respect to a probable mitotic etiology as well. So to further assess the proximal jejunal lesion, we try to perform an upper GI endoscopy. And if possible, we also wanted to place a nasojejunal tube to establish an enteral route. During endoscopy, we couldn't get past the DJ flexure. It was duodenum was dilated up to the point of DJ flexure. Beyond it was completely narrow, and even attempts to pass guide wire or use pediatric scope is we couldn't achieve negotiation beyond the narrowing. So we took some random biopsy at the level of DJ flexure, which was non-contributory. So now we are having a patient who's probably had a recurrent history of acute pancreatitis with established chronic pancreatitis background, having complete luminal obstruction due to a lesion in the proximal jejunum with persistent high output. So he was already in an hospital for nearly 1 week, and then he was with us for almost 5 days. Despite all resuscitation and conservative management, he continued to have high rice tube aspirate. We did supplement him with parental nutrition during his stay here. So given the non-progression of obstruction as well as an peri-etiology of an enhancing lesion in proximal jejunum, we decided to go ahead with surgery. So intraoperatively, we confirmed the grossly distended stomach and the multiple collaterals that were present in the vicinity of pancreas. And there was a firm mass. During surgery, it appeared like a firm mass, which was of a length of 5 centimeters, just distal to the DJ flexure. This was densely adherent to the transverse mesocolon, the inferior mesenteric vein, as well as the retroperitoneum. There were minimal adjacent mesenteric lymph nodes that were present. To be frank, during surgery, it didn't look like mitotic, but however, there was an significant firmness to the mass, which didn't appear to be just adhesion related. So we went ahead with the resection. These are the intraoperative images. Wanted to highlight the distended stomach, the multiple omental collaterals which we see. These are classically seen in patients who had recurrent acute pancreatitis or chronic pancreatitis, who have multiple episodes in the past, have some amount of portal vein or splenic vein or SMV thrombosis, and then develop these collaterals over years. This is the transverse colon which is lifted up, and we can find the proximal jejunum densely adherent to the transverse mesocolon. Again, these collaterals are noted here. So this is after the separation of the jejunum from the transverse mesocolon. We could feel the thickening in the proximal jejunum. These are the two extremes to which they were supple, between which we had the firm mass that could be palpated. So we did a resection and an end-to-end anastomosis at the level of nearly 2 to 3 centimeters from DJ flexure, and we performed a feeding jejunostomy. This is the cut section of the resected specimen. So the mucosa more or less appeared normal. I think we can make a note of the fibrosis that is seen in the submucosal space here. I don't have a better image to see show the cross section of the intestinal wall, but this is something which is not usually seen. So his postoperative period was relatively uneventful. We started on feeding jejunostomy, then it was gradually increased. We did do a contrast study on POD5, and when there was no extravasation, we went ahead with orals and removed the DT. We were discharged on postoperative DE. So we got a final histopathology report as a fissuring ulceration with a transmural acute inflammation and fibroblastic proliferation. So we are. It was not something that it was surprise to us after we saw the specimen, but that it could validate our reason that it was a transmural inflammation. It was not just an inflammation which was confined to the serosa, which could have been tackled by adhesivolysis. So follow-up, patient visited us actually yesterday, though we had planned to present him earlier. Incidentally, he came yesterday, and over the last 3 months, he has gained 2 kgs. But now he presented to us with, again, history suggestive of acute pancreatitis, epigastric pain radiating to back. Now he gave us a complaint of dysphagia. Not the bilious vomiting he had earlier, but this was classical dysphagia, both to solids and semi-solids. Liquids he was able to tolerate a little bit. So we did an CT. I've purposefully taken the coronal sections because I thought I can illustrate it, the findings I want to highlight better in the coronal section. So again, the pancreasis atrophy, the stomach mildly distended, but that was not the reason for the study. So I just frozen this frame. We can see the esophagus which is coming here. There is some amount of peri-esophageal and inflammation surrounding the GE junction, and we could not actually make out the lumen continuing up to the stomach. So the esophagus is surrounded by inflammation, and now we are also having some narrowing of the lower end of esophagus at the level of GE junction. However, it's not causing some gross upstream dilatation. So probably there is some narrowing which is causing the symptoms, but not complete narrowing for us to be worried about as of now. We did a contrast study to see whether there was any holdup. There was no holdup. So all the contrast was freely passing below and even across the anastomosis that we had performed. So probably we thought it is a recurrent acute pancreatitis related inflammation, again causing a GE junction narrowing. So we have placed the right tube and we have started him on nasogastric feeding. He's going to be on follow-up, and probably we'll update you once he comes back after 10 days as to how he has responded to management. So this is the brief case summary that we had wanted to discuss today. Coming to the outline of discussion, it will be, I'll start with gastrointestinal complications of pancreatitis per se, then pancreatitis related bowel obstruction, the etiopathogenesis, a small session on management of this obstruction, and finally some take home points. So gastrointestinal complication of pancreatitis is quite common. It is not like we don't come across them, but they are not actually given such an importance given the background of more morbid complications like vascular or septic complications. So they are usually given priority in dealing with in acute pancreatitis rather than intestine related. So it is not a something uncommon. It actually includes a spectrum of complications, which are actually resultant of inflammation, subsequently an ischemia, necrosis involving the intestine. They can lead to obstruction, perforation, and even fistula development. Among all these, the most common site to be involved is the transverse mesocolon. So why particularly the transverse colon? The transverse colon and splenic flexure, apart from their anatomical relation to the pancreas, they also have the blood supply through the transverse mesocolon, which can get affected by the enzymatic activity. So we are looking at a direct action of enzyme on the bowel wall. We are also looking on the enzyme extravasating through the transverse mesocolon. We are also looking at the vessels which can get thrombosed due to the enzymatic activity of the pancreatitis. So all these put together make the transverse colon and splenic flexure to be commonly affected by any acute pancreatitis insult. Over and above, the splenic flexure is also an watershed area. So that is again going to be in place where any ischemic complication is likely to manifest first. So this is just flowchart as to how the inflammation is likely to occur. The enzymes track through the mesentery or mesocolon, depending upon the location we are dealing with. Then they involve the adjacent bowel walls, which cause an inflammatory reaction. And these are actually seen in majority of the CTs in acute pancreatitis setting. So any severe acute pancreatitis patient, when we have an imaging, we are likely to find this circumferential thickening and mural stratifications of the intestines very adjacent to the inflammatory collection. So I just picked up few representative images from a few articles. So this is the duodenal thickening. The top left, you can find it's quite well thickened, and here also the D3 part is also thickened. This is on injection of contrast. We can find the mucosa is enhancing, so thereby showing the mural stratification that we commonly describe in this setting. Again, the duodenal thickening is well appreciated here. Coming to the next stage, now is the process where the vessels get involved in the inflammatory process. So this leads to the reduction of blood supply to the involved bowel segment, thereby leading to ischemia and finally necrosis as well. Again, the presentation can be varied. We can have a frank open perforation necrosis, which can have peritoneal features and CT showing out the rent. And we can also have sometimes subacute presentation where there's a thinning of the wall with a small simmering sepsis the patient continues to have despite maximal control of sepsis. they can find the duodenum, which is here. This was an MRI that was taken on the 10th day. And this is an MRI that was taken 16 days later. We can find the duodenum thinning out. So these are probably an precursor markers for duodenal ischemia. And it's not only duodenum and transverse colon we are looking at. This is an MRI, again, thickening, which was seen in day 6 of pancreatitis in the ascending colon. And it has started showing thinning of the wall in another 2 weeks' time. Similarly, an ileal segment, which was relatively normal during the initial phases of acute pancreatitis, then becomes thinned out. So the process of inflammation is going to be universal, and when the inflammatory nature of the collection, wherever it is going to spread, that is going to dictate the segment of bowel that is going to be involved. So it can be anywhere from the esophagus to the rectosigmoid junction. This is not uncommon when we explore patients for colonic ischemia. Typically, the distal 1/3 of the transverse colon and the splenic flexure gets involved in colonic ischemia. Sometimes you, without going into the process of ischemia, they might start developing obstructive features. This is because of the inflammatory process having a very serosal inflammatory reaction. Those are likely to activate the fat necrosis because of the lipase content in the pancreatic collections. And these in turn lead to fibrosis and then deposition of calcium. So over a period of time, this is going to be progressive and can lead to bowel obstruction. Again, a CT which shows an stenosed splenic flexure and a descending colon. And here we can find the transverse colon, which is grossly distended. Even the small bowels are distended, but just to identify, the distal descending colon is collapsed in stenosed, whereas the transverse colon is distended, signifying the obstruction is at the level of splenic flexure. Another possibility is perforation. In splenic flexure is going to be the most common site of perforation. In imaging, as I discussed earlier, it can be directly visualized if we find a discontinuity in the bowel wall and an extravasation of contrast, which is given intraluminally, either rectal contrast or in contrast given via oral. Sometimes it can be identified by indirect means, wherein we find pneumoperitoneum or air collection close to the splenic flexure. You can also have gastroduodenal and cecal perforations, which are again a resultant of the enzymatic activity of the collections. This is one study which I came across, wherein they had tried to find out any particular risk factors for the delayed colonic perforations in patients with acute pancreatitis. So this was in 2017, if I'm not wrong, and published from Japan, where they had patients who developed colonic perforation as early as 6th day from the onset of pain to as late as 47th day. The general dictum is usually it is after 4 weeks, but we may not be right always. And they couldn't, only risk factor that they proposed was if Balthazar grade is E, that is, there are more than 2 location of sites of collection, then they are likely to have colonic perforation. But they don't have an study population and a control population to actually come out with any substantial conclusion. Few representative images from their study. The one on the left is one patient who had severe pancreatitis, and we can find the descending colon given way. So the collection is tracking along the anterior Gerota's fascia. Again, the one on the right is another patient who had an ascending colon perforation. So we can see the massive pneumo that is created after the anterior wall of ascending colon that is given. Another case report which showed about cecal perforation following acute pancreatitis. This is one interesting case report where they had a gastric perforation following acute pancreatitis. We generally believe that stomach has a good blood supply, so they are unlikely to have affected by any ischemic insult, but they are also not resistant to perforations or ischemia secondary to acute pancreatitis. The patients can also have GI fistulas. This can be either and process secondary due to the enzymatic activity, or they can be due to the vascular thrombosis, secondary to the perivascular inflammatory processes. Sometimes even they can be iatrogenic. We place pigtail catheters, and sometimes we find after 2 weeks it starts draining fecal content. And in a place where from PJ where we used to do irrigation quite often, patient suddenly starts complaining of diarrhea after a bout of irrigation. So it can also be iatrogenic. So all these things can lead to GI fistula formation, which can manifest either as an hemorrhage or a secondary infection. Coming to the obstruction as such in recurrent, acute, and chronic pancreatitis, the most common site is likely to be the duodenal obstruction, especially common chronic pancreatitis, which is roughly around 1% of hospitalized individuals. They can be either transient or fixed. So in case of transient, they're generally due to the inflammatory process. So the edema per se in the bowel wall is going to compromise the lumen, secondary to the inflammatory process adjacent. So as the edema subsides, the obstruction is likely to be relieved. On the other hand, we can also have fixed obstruction. This can be a resultant of pseudocyst nearby, which can have a mass effect and try to displace the bowel, or a fibrotic process that can occur due to recurrent attacks of chronic acute pancreatitis. Another specific entity is groove pancreatitis. Again, they present with duodenal obstruction. This is an article which was published in 1974, but I specifically took this article just to for better understanding that it is not mandatory that an obstruction can occur only at one site. They can occur at multiple sites in the same individual. Probably our patient also might develop a level of obstruction at lower GI junction, so lower esophagus. We don't know. Only time will tell that. So this is a series of barium study where we can find the complete duodenal cutoff following acute pancreatitis. Also, there is an narrowing at the level of hepatic fixture. So this patient has a level of obstruction at the duodenum as well as at the level of hepatic fixture. Whenever we try to manage these patients with obstruction, it is very important to identify all the sites of obstruction. Rather, missing out might actually lead to mismanagement. This is from the same case report where they done a review. I just put forth it to make us understand what are the various reasons by which we can have obstruction. So the classical fibrosis due to chronic pancreatitis is the one which was present in 2 or 3 patients. But more commonly, it was the inflammatory mass. So the inflammatory mass in the head or in the tail, it causes the kinking of the transverse mesocolon. So that can lead to some colonic kinking. It can also involve the small bowel just distal, just inferior to the transverse mesocolon. So like in our patient probably had an inflammation which was involving the transverse mesocolon and also some part in the infracolic compartment that led to the strong fibrotic reaction in the proximal jejunum. Even in this study, I think one patient had a similar thing where the jejunum was affected. Yeah, the one Moore et al. Where 1956 they had a jejunum that was involved due to an inflammatory mass in the body. Our patient didn't have an inflammatory mass, but basically trying to say we might have an inflammatory process that can lead to bowel obstruction in any part of the GI tract. It can involve the duodenum, it can involve the jejunum, ileum, entire large intestine. So we need to be very careful in attending to these patients. And again, coming to the procedure, they are very tailor-made for the type of obstruction we are dealing with. If it's going to be just an inflammatory mass related to adhesion, the simple adhesiolysis can suffice. Whereas if it's going to be a chronic fixed problem, then we might have to go in for a resection. In some cases, when we don't have actually an ischemia, but just an obstruction, but patient is very moribund, we may not be able to do the complete resection part. We might just do a diversion to tide over the crisis. So the management actually has is highly customized to the situation that we are in, and it can range from just a stoma to a radical resection, sometimes even anastomosis. So in our setting, we had the patient who was not having gross acute pancreatitis related complications in other ways. We were able to optimize him better, and the site of obstruction also was quite proximal. So all this meant that we would prefer an resection and then primary anastomosis. A specific word on paralytic ileus that is quite commonly seen in acute pancreatitis. It is attributed to the involvement of the superior mesenteric plexus or sometimes even the colonic ischemia. The classical sentinel loop sign that we come across in even a plain X-ray can actually be an indirect evidence of acute pancreatitis. But it is very important for us to understand that it's crucial to differentiate a paralytic ileus from an obstruction bar ischemia. So in those cases, if there's a persistent ileus, it is better to do a CT scan to find out what is the vascularity status, what is the dilatation segment of bowel that is dilated. So those additional informations are very crucial in differentiating ileus from any other organic pathology. So this is an image where we have the entire small intestine dilated. We can find the pancreatitis inflammation extending even as low as to the psoas. There can be even obstruction related to pseudocyst, as we mentioned earlier. So this is a classical lesser curvature collection. So it is in the hepatogastric ligament. We can find it is displacing the pylorus anteroinferiorly, compromising its lumen partially. So after a mere simple drainage, an endoscopic stent that was placed, we can find the lumen now little more expanded to tolerate solid force. This is another image. At first sight, it again looks similar to the previous case where we had a pseudocyst. So this patient is also having a pseudocyst. And we can find the intestine which is on the anterior surface of the pseudocyst. So we can find the bowel segments which are proximal to it dilated, distal to it which is collapsed. This is the pseudocyst here. So probably the pseudocyst is causing an extraneous compression, but we need to keep in mind it may not be the case always. So the wall of the pseudocyst might cause adhesion changes, and those in turn can be the cause for the obstruction. So a near drainage in this patient would not have helped in the may not have helped in the resolution of obstruction. So this patient had a drainage as well as additional lysis for the relief of jejunal obstruction. So coming to the management as such, I think very pertinent that we first identify obstruction, differentiate it from the ileus, and also try to differentiate it from other complicated situations such as ischemia or perforation. Given the multi-level involvement that can be seen, it's necessary for us to do a good imaging and find out the level of obstruction. Decide whether they are fixed type of obstruction or a transient type of obstruction, and then find out if there is possibility it's a pseudocyst related obstruction. So once we have all the factors that we need to make a decision, this is a flow chart which I made it myself. I didn't get it from any reference. So probably we can have a discussion to see whether this is the way we can approach it. In an acute setting, after in chronic setting is generally a surgical process. So in our patient, he had come out of the acute setting. It was in the later part due to the fibrotic process which is going on for a chronic period that he had an obstruction. So an upfront surgery probably is something which they will benefit from. But in an acute setting, we'll probably have to differentiate from ischemia and ileus. And the first level is likely to be in trial medical management, because the edema that is to be associated with the acute pancreatitis can resolve with time. So the management should include ensuring appropriate nutrition. So it can start with nasogastric feed or nasojejunal feed if the obstruction is at the level of duodenum. Sometimes if it's going to be distal and patient is not able to tolerate orals, we might have to go in with a parental nutrition. If there is any collection, we probably can drain them so that to improve reduce the inflammatory process and improve the bowel activity. But anytime if an ischemia is suspected, then surgery would likely to be having an upper road. Once we are sure that it is fixed, so either we know by the imaging itself it's a fibrotic process, or we have given a trial management and it is not improved for a period of say 5 days or 7 days, then we are probably looking at an fixed obstruction. In that scenario, we should start thinking about intervention. So if there is a pseudocyst, we can attempt a drainage, or if there is an addition or fibrotic stricture that is suspected, we probably need to start thinking about surgery. Endoscopic stenting has been done. In fact, I did have an image where they did a colonoscopic stenting of the splenic flexure, but it's not well established. For a benign process, putting in a stent, removing it might be difficult. It may not stay there, and over a long period of time, we might have bowel perforations related to the stent. So as such, the endoscopy role in stenting of these strictures is still not well established. Coming to surgery, again, given the situation, we might have to tailor the actual management we are trying to provide, which might include draining the collection, simple diversion or resecting the involved segment, whether stoma or primary anastomosis needs to be made. So there are a lot of decisions that have to be made even during surgery in these. So finally, the take-home points, we need to be aware of the GI complications, especially an obstruction that can present with acute pancreatitis or its sequelae. Colon is most likely to be the involved bowel segment. They can be either fixed or transient. So depending upon the exact pathological process, we are dealing with either a transmural inflammation leading to fibrosis stricture, or it's an addition related complication, or it's a pseudocyst related, the management is going to change. But if at all, I would like to impress on one point, it's very important for us to differentiate it from an ileus and ischemia, which are also very common in this setting. In chronic pancreatitis, they're likely to be more fixed obstructions, and so the requirement of surgery is likely to be high. So this is one good review article which I found. It is from PJ Chandigarh, published in 2019 from Journal of Gastroenterology and Hepatology, which spoke in detail about all this content.
Excellent case, Gautam. So a few things regarding the anastomosis at the ligament of Treitz. Did you have any concerns about the healing process? I think I saw an end-to-end anastomosis. Yes. Did you have any concerns regarding the anastomosis? I'm really scared of doing anastomosis at that point. I didn't learn this from pancreatitis. I used to do a lot of trauma in Trivandrum, and we had the same issue. People would do an end-to-end anastomosis at the ligament of Treitz when I was a first year, and we would have long delays. So
if I can answer that, actually, I've had a good number of DJ malignancies in my earlier place where I worked, and that was published also. Some more cases are added by another author and published, but that is the place where I thought it's possible to do a DJ anastomosis. Actually, a lot of them have been done without a feeding jejunostomy, actually, and luckily the contrast study on the 5th day didn't show any leak or no narrowing as such. In this patient also, because that experience going close to the DJ, because at least about 2 centimeters of bowel is available, so it was possible to do. I think
the fear I have developed over the years. What I do is I usually connect it to the third part of the duodenum. It's almost a duodenojejunostomy. So it's a mental block I've never been able to overcome. If I do anything on the DJ flexure, I staple and I do a DJ.
Yeah, Pradhaman, comment on the DJ anastomosis.
Sir, in this case, I have some difference of opinion as with Gautam. One issue, I think this patient has more of a venous thrombosis component of that proximal jejunum DJ flexure area, because that bowel looks like chronic venous thrombosis of that particular bowel. So that is why it produced a fixed stricture and which is not expanded, because the bowel wall will be more in mesenteric venous thrombosis. I think the first jejunal branch or some venous vein in that area has gone in for a venous thrombosis. Regarding the anastomosis at the DJ flexure, I'm also a little bit afraid of doing anastomosis at that level as with Dr. Ilango. But I have, most of the time what I do is I just cut that level and make the anastomosis just below the uncinate area in the second, third part junction. I have also done.
Prathapan, is it a Kerala trading fear?
No, I think it's easier to do anastomosis in that area, because when you want to do anastomosis deep in the DJ flexure area, sometimes it can be very difficult, and you may have to do a big incisions. Suppose you do it for a trauma, you may have to do extension to that left side, etc. But if you plan it for a tumor in that DJ flexure area, I think it may be possible. But I'm comfortable with doing anastomosis, and it makes no difference because there is no not much of
a blind loop. Yeah. So sir, so for that technique, you release the ligament of Treitz and you make it come down?
Yeah, a little bit, yes. No, because we can, because those vessels are so small in that area. Now, when you're dissecting the ligament of Treitz, you can make out the discoloration of the bowel in that, that you have to be very careful about it, because these patients should not develop post-operative stricture. Actually, patient came with a stricture, shouldn't develop another stricture. So, not so much of dissection. It's limited dissection, yes. Gautam, I have a couple of questions. Yeah, yes.
The other thing I noticed is it's almost like how you described, you picked up the literature. I believe that the direct contact of the transverse mesocolon with the chronically inflamed pancreas foreshortens it, causes something like a colonic fibrosis. I think because it's very closely associated, this also gets blocked, this jejunal obstruction. The other one case you showed me, duodenal obstruction with right hepatic flexure, again, is likely to be inflammatory adhesions just outside the duodenum, affecting both the sides. It's pretty much, it is pericolic and periduodenal fibrosis. Apart from that, but these are very rare complications in acute or even chronic pancreatitis.
No, I don't think it's a rare complication. We come across a lot of cases with this sort of colonic obstruction, because most of them will have mass lesion or inflammatory mass.
Acute pancreatitis,
No, even chronic pancreatitis also, we have lesions producing inflammation in the body tail region. In those cases, we have these sort of presentation. I have seen one patient coming with sigmoid colon stricture in a patient with pancreatitis, sigmoid colon strictures. And one more thing, if you give long-term pancreatic enzyme replacement in patients with chronic pancreatitis, that can also produce some sort of colopathy or some colonic lesions, as with the enzymatic digestion of some other area, as Dr. Gautam mentioned. I think in literature, there is an entity called colopathy induced by pancreatic enzymes. Gautam, are you aware of?
Yes, sir. Fibrosing colopathy, basically seen in high dose of PERT given in very in cystic fibrosis, very common in cystic fibrosis patient when we give high doses of pancreatic enzyme. So
if we are not digressing, let me ask a question. How are you using pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy in chronic pancreatitis?
So I would start with the basic of
I'm not asking I'm asking your policy. What are you doing?
Can I have some questions in relation to this case before we go to?
Okay, sir. Okay.
Yeah. Now, actually, Gautam, so this is a complication of chronic pancreatitis and not acute pancreatitis.
Sir, as Dr. Prathapan said, if there are two possibilities. Even I thought there is something entity called as portal colopathy and portal entropathy, where due to the venous hypertension, such a secondary to SMV thrombosis, then they might have strictures at that level. So if you are dealing with that, then it's likely to be a chronic pancreatitis sequelae. In this patient, why I felt it is a sequelae of acute pancreatitis. Chronic pancreatitis is kind of inflammation, transverse mesocolon, jejunum as a whole is, I felt, little unlikely. The recurrent acute pancreatitis should have been the one which was causing the enzymatic release, and chronic pancreatitis pathology is more likely like confined to the pancreas there or the immediate vicinity rather than a trans-mesocolonic problem. So that's why I thought it's the 6 months prior he had an episode. Those could have been initiated, or even before that, we may not know. It's a chronic process, but secondary to a recurrent acute pancreatitis.
Yeah, Prathapan, any comment on that? Yeah.
I have a doubt regarding this case. You diagnosed a case of chronic pancreatitis with recurrent episodes of pain and small bowel obstruction. Why didn't you tackle the pancreatitis per se? Chronic pancreatitis part in this case.
I agree, sir.
We just left.
How do you tackle the chronic pancreatitis in this patient? Have you seen the pancreas? Have you seen calcinosis all over? You're thinking in terms of total pancreatectomy or something like that?
Sir, have you observed this pancreatic duct? The pancreatic duct shows dilatation.
Yeah.
In my observation, patient coming with dilated pancreatic duct, their results of surgeries are better. Okay, so the lesion is not producing direct effect on the jejunum. The problem is recurrent acute episode occurring on a chronic pancreatitis. That is what I felt. So if that is the situation, and if you tackle only the jejunal stricture, I think he can have recurrence of this problem somewhere. That may be the reason for he is developing in esophageal area. So I think you have to tackle the pancreatitis part at the earliest, if possible. It would have been done during that procedure itself, because that it's easy to do fresh procedure when you have a dilated duct. You can identify the duct and all.
No, yeah, Gautam is not commenting on that. I'd like to comment, because see here, a youngster comes, skin and bones. He has been nutritionally depleted and upper GI obstruction, and he's been there is suspicion of a malignancy, and then he's been told by the treating physicians earlier that he got a malignancy, that nothing can be done. Actually, it's gone into their mind, the malignancy. It's gone into our mind also, it's a malignancy. Our radiologist says, the mucosa is lighting up, there's a narrowing, there's obstruction, and we generally do not suspect an obstruction beyond DJ flex. We expect somewhere, the DJ or the duodenum or colon is just stuck to the pancreas. So this was not on our mind of trying to do something for the pancreas, because still only when we resected that segment, we know that it's not a mucosa is clean. But I think that's a very good point to take. But this patient with I do not know whether pancreatic decompression will stop the recurrent pancreatitis. It's good. Side ducts are obstructed. There's so much calcinosis all around. Yeah, brother.
I have so far completed more than 300 frays in my department, because we have a lot of chronic pancreatitis case. Just like this case, I have a patient I'm going to discuss in one of the meetings. The same thing happened. I went ahead with an extensive resection, and finally it turned out to be some non-malignant etiology on a background of chronic pancreatitis. So all the masses which we see on a chronic pancreatitis is not malignant. Even intraoperatively, it looks like a malignant mass with the infiltration and all. So I think the decision making on a chronic pancreatitis is very tricky. But my suggestion is to go in for again to tackle the pancreas in patients with chronic pancreatitis, especially when you have problems like venous thrombosis, collateral formation. I think one of the difficult situation which you face when you have chronic pancreatitis is presence of collaterals. I think those patients bleed profusely when you tackle the pancreatic duct or when you open the pancreas. If you have opened already and if you have already some bleeding there and you are comfortable to do a surgery, I think that is the best time to do phrase in this patient.
Now, if I can comment on this, Pradhaman, see, this is not a head concentrated pathology. You see, the calculi all over, and essentially they're the body tail area. How is phrase going to help in this patient?
No, the basic principle of these sort of patients is to decompress the pancreas maximum. I think when you open the pancreatic duct, there will be multiple strictures. And ultimately, all this has to drain into either into the duodenum or into the loop which you are providing. So if you do a phrase procedure, the pressure in the pancreas is relieved. The pain may be related to ischemia, you know, that clumping and wiring theory described in pancreas. I think if you decompress the pancreatic duct or you open the pancreas, that can produce some sort of fasciotomy effect on pancreas. That can actually relieve pain in chronic pancreatitis.
Ilango, comment.
Sir, I would agree with Pradhapan. I would have also loved to tackle the pancreas at the same time. But honestly, till Pradhapan raised the issue, I was also focused on the jejunal stricture. It is common to mistake strictures associated with pancreatitis with malignancy. It's almost as a shouldering sign on radiology also. So it's a common mistake to see, look at those strictures and identify it as malignancy. That much I know, but Pradhapan raised a valid principle that you can tackle, because unless you have tackled the pancreatitis, the recurrent attacks is further likely to cause new problems in this patient.
Yeah, Gautam, a comment on Pradhapan's point.
Yes, sir. Even when I was going back through the case summary, I thought we should have tackled it. That would have addressed a lot more issues.
Now, the second point, again, for theoretical discussion is, when you're doing a resection anastomosis so very proximal to the DJ, and then you have another group for pancreatic jejunostomy, is a bit dicey, because that would be technically a bit of a challenge. Now, my second question, Gautam, again is, now you've shown a chart with case reports, you collated case reports, and actually there are duodenum, good number of patients, there 5 or 6 of them have duodenal obstruction. I think that is a very common teaching, that duodenal obstruction is seen in chronic pancreatitis. There's nothing great about it. Of course, sigmoid colon, transverse colon we have seen also. Jejunum, there's only one case.
So this review was in 1974. Others they have not tabulated. In 1974, they have reviewed.
No, there are jejunal obstructions in some other cases as well.
There are at least 3-4 cases which I could find, but majority were managed conservatively. Okay. They didn't require resection.
Now, the other question in relation to this is, in these case reports, how many of them suspected malignancy and went in?
In the 23 cases, there are 3 case reports of malignancy, sir.
No. When the clinician went in, did they go with a suspicion of malignancy, or did they know jolly well that these are benign strictures, pancreatic induced, and then went ahead?
Sir, it is generally the inflammatory strictures themselves appear malignant in CT. It is more a norm rather than an exception. Right. So it is definitely difficult to distinguish between it's an inflammatory or malignancy. So there would have been a suspicion in majority of cases, even in the review articles, whichever I've gone through, patients who are having this pseudo tumor kind of inflammatory pathologies, they are very difficult to differentiate from the true tumors.
No, but the reason why I'm asking this is, suppose if we knew that this particular patient is a benign obstruction, we wouldn't have resected. We could have done some bypass. We could have, because the risk of a leak is because this fellow nutritionally depleted and skin and bone, the chance of leak are high, and the location again is high. So that we are taking undue risk. If we know that this is from now on, maybe we'll keep thinking that whenever we find a bowel obstruction in chronic pancreatitis, benign unless otherwise proved. And accordingly, we will not think of any resection and think of bypass. Yeah, Pradhan.
The location of obstruction has something to do with your prediction of malignancy. If the duodenal obstruction is more proximal towards the uncinate area, maybe having occult malignancy and infiltration on that area, because many a time the only presentation will be gastric outlet obstruction without any evident mass or anything on a CT, and when we go in, we will find lesions in that particular area. So one of the presentation of a chronic pancreatitis with malignancy is duodenal obstruction without an obvious mass on CT when the lesion occurs on the uncinate process. That obstructs the duodenum. I think when you have a very roomy duodenum on a background of chronic pancreatitis, malignancy has to be the first diagnosis until and unless proved. But if the obstruction goes more distally, the chances of malignancy is less, chances of inflammatory strictures are more. That is what I feel from the experience.
Okay, the next question again to Gautam is that how many of these cases have had Prathapan's procedure of relieving the bowel obstruction and treatment of chronic pancreatitis? Has anyone thought what Prathapan thought? Are there any combinations? Question one. Question two is that when that chronic pancreatitis is not being treated, how many of them developed another stricture, like the one we're going to have, who's likely to develop a stricture?
Sir, with respect to the case reports as such, they've all spoken only up to the bowel obstruction. So they have just tackled the bowel, they have not tackled the pancreas. Only as when they had suspected a duodenal obstruction with jaundice, with duodenal in chronic pancreatitis, they had gone ahead and done a pancreatic duodenectomy. That is anyway going to take care of the chronic pancreatitis as well. So, given this background, what I would like to collate sometimes is we might have chronic pancreatitis related biliary strictures, but the pancreas patient is not symptomatic for the chronic pancreatitis. Even in those cases, it is recommended to actually tackle the chronic pancreatitis as well. It is not only the biliary stricture issue. I think the analogy will almost remain the same. If required, I think we should tackle the underlying chronic pancreatitis as well. There is no long-term follow-up of these patients to tell us whether they developed chronic pancreatitis related problem in the future. So probably in our patient, we'll be knowing what is exactly happening.
I think that is the indication for surgery, isn't it? You have severe, relentless pain. Second is the presence of complication. Third is suspicion of malignancy. So these are the three indications. So this is a complication.
So any other comment from anybody else who's been watching? Actually, this is going live on LGS and also Sudan Surgical Club. Anyone wants to comment? Prathapan, before we close, what will be the? I think that's a good take-home point of.
Two more points. These sort of paralytic ileus-like presentation I have seen chronic pancreatitis without any acute exacerbation. 2-3 patients, I didn't get any diagnosis. What is the reason for obstruction and all? We diagnosed it something unrelated to pancreatitis. But when a second patient came with the same finding and same presentation, I thought the chronic pancreatitis can have paralytic ileus-like presentation, because it can produce some problem with the celiac plexus or splanchnic nerves, some form of neuroparalysis, because many of them will have some diabetes, they have long-standing neuropathies, which we don't know. So chronic pancreatitis can present in any way, any presentation, obstruction, paralytic ileus, malignancy, non-malignant masses producing obstruction, so many things. I think there are all variants of chronic pancreatitis we have seen so far. So one more point I have to mention, the benign type of chronic pancreatitis developing splenoportal conference thrombosis is becoming a very common entity now. They are present with severe pain. When we give the standard treatment, they won't respond. When we investigate, we will find the thrombosis of these splenic vein, portal vein area, and we will start ecosprin or some other antiplatelet drug. Most of them will respond to the pain. So one more drug in the treatment of chronic pancreatitis has come. I think the ecosprin or anti-inflammatory drug has come as a newer drug, like the Ensohil type of preparation in tackling pain. I think that again is a reason for presenting venous thrombosis and strictures.
Now we'll get back to Ilango's question of pancreatic enzyme replacement. Yeah, Gautam, to respond to his question.
Initially, start with 25,000 units TDS with every meal, and if the patient actually, it's better to encourage with the 10,000 units as well as for the snacks. All the patients, I do start on PPAs, though they may not be as per the actual guidelines. And very important that they are also put on vitamin supplementation.
So what is your goal? What is your goal on the therapy?
Basically, look for the weight gain and steatoria. So these will be the two major things that I will be looking at in any of these.
Prathapan?
The reason for starting pancreatic enzyme replacement, is it for steatorrhea or is it for pain? I think though the textbook says it has got only placebo effect on the management of pain, I think many of our patient responds to pancreatic enzyme replacement with pain, because the indication is different from Western people and our patients, because they are more worried about their steatorrhea part. Our patients are not worried about steatorrhea part at all. They are worried only about pain. And when we give these sort of non-enteric-coated tablets, they all get good pain relief, at least for some time. So when they are not responding, we have to think of alternate diagnosis, either a complication or a malignancy. I think they all respond for a short period at least. I think it's not the placebo effect. I think it has some effect.
Now, I want to know, Ilango, have you ever really come across this real steatorrhea? Because this is something I don't see.
Sir, see, this steatorrhea is, like Prathapan said, it's a Western phenomenon where they take a lot of meat and fat with almost every meal. But here, I think in Tamil Nadu at least, there is a proper study from Amrita where they have studied the amount of fat that is taken on a regular meal by normal people. So that fat consumption is extremely less. So when I came here to Chennai, what I did was, we found that most people are taking just rice and then some little bit of dal or protein, and pretty much very little quantity of oil. So what I did is, I do not tell them to, the first thing I tell them is, with chronic pancreatitis, do not worry, you can take whatever you like. So that diabetes allows. Second thing I did is, if they want to have good meals, that is proper biryani or some oily fried chicken, I tell them, okay, carry 50,000 of Creon. That meal alone, you just mix and eat. So we are not treating the patient, we are treating the meal. We tell them it's going to help you digest, you mix it and have your food as much as you like. And if you want to have some vadai, have 10,000 units of Creon in your pocket, have it whenever you like. So initially I did like that, and I noticed a good amount of weight gain. So I rarely operate for chronic pancreatitis. I rarely operate for, even though we belong to adjacent states, I rarely operate for chronic pancreatitis. Most of them are on follow-up. Invariably they burn out, they don't do anything. Only when I have a suspected mass, large head lesions, complications, I do surgery. But that's apart from that. So even after surgery, I follow this. And once I got thoroughly confused, why is my chronic pancreatitis patient becoming obese? And I called HR and said, I don't know how to explain this, but they have become obese, which is very unusual in chronic pancreatitis. And he also did not have a valid explanation. The thing is, if you encourage them to eat the kind of food which we eat in South India, is conducive to a management without regular pancreatic enzyme replacement. The rule does not apply in Kerala because I think a lot of people have fatty meal.
Prathapan, my question again is, do you put all your patients who had Frey procedure on pancreatic enzyme replacement? If so, for how long? Is there any cutoff?
No, sir. We will give for at least 1 year. We will give some form of pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy.
Why?
No, most of them will have some vague symptoms or pain. They may complain of recurrent pain. That is the main indication. So if we are not giving any tablet, they will be always almost always complaining. I think
then our whole
Not
deed of doing the surgery is gone. See,
Yeah.
no,
I will share an experience. I will share an
Sir, I will tell you. Before surgery, if the patient comes with a severe pain, actually I will ask the patient whether you require surgery or not. You have to tell no, because you have to continue with your drugs for the next 1 or 2 years at least. Even if you do surgery, diabetes is not going to improve. So their problems are not tackled. At least this steatorrhea or diabetes are not tackled. Only the pain is tackled. So if you can manage pain by pancreatic enzyme, it will be okay. But most of the patient will think the other way around. If you do surgery, the cost of pancreatic enzyme replacement is very high. A Creon 25,000 capsule costs around 65 rupees now. So they have to take at least 3 or 4 capsules a day. So their daily cost will be just like the transplant patient where when they take the immunosuppressant.
Yeah, that's why I changed the policy.
So, but one thing is very sure, when they take fatty meal, even after surgery, they get pain. So alcohol and fatty meal, these are the two culprits which produces post-pancreatic surgery pain. It is the Frey procedure pain, because that is the reason why I am giving them this pancreatic enzyme replacement. At least, even if they take fatty meal, the capsule will take care of their stimulation. That is the main reason I am continuing this.
So I would like to differ from him. I mean, I don't want this to, we should not digress from the topic, but this is what I did. So for Frey's procedure, I usually cauterize. Prathapan, correct me if you have, or you can interrupt me if there is any difficulty. I do a cauterization, and there is an uncinate duct which runs deeper. There are two uncinate ducts, one which runs superficially, sometimes it runs, another one runs deeper. The key to Frey is to hit that duct. If you open the duct and it will run and curve, it will be like one C.
Yes.
And it will go run parallel and end close to the superior mesenteric vein. That's the only place where you have to be careful. If you are able to hit the duct, there will be some stones there, and it takes a bit of time. So what I do is, it's a tedious process, but every small stone I do intraoperative ultrasound and then pick up, mark, and then take out. So I don't know whether it's pure luck. I've been doing this since I started doing this Frey procedure. None of my patients have come back with pain. None. I'm not boasting, because some of them are my close relatives.
Then why are you not doing it anymore?
No, sir. I do it only when they have severe limitations because of painkiller use. My cousin's daughter, she was just 32 kilograms when she came to Chennai with chronic pancreatitis. She discontinued her engineering studies. She was just skin and bones. I had just returned from US, and they agreed for surgery. I did a Frey. It took about 4.5 hours to pick out everything. Today she has finished her engineering, happily married. Just because of COVID, she returned back from Saudi Arabia. Apart from that, see, they have absolutely no pain. They just come and see me once in a year. They
No enzymes.
No, she has SOS enzymes. Like I said, no, she has very heavy meals, and she feels that steatorrhea might happen. I ask her to do it. So that's very rare. That's very rare. She has gained weight, married happily, that kind. So quality of life improves when you take the uncinate duct very well. Most of the time when I have post-Frey, there is a remnant of tissue left behind. The posterior capsule should be left behind free. So that's the way I did. Prathapan, for your comments.
No, I think it has two important things. When you completely clear the pancreatic head, these are the patients who are lucky not develop a malignancy in their later part of life. Because when you leave behind some stones, these are the sites where there is chronic inflammation continuing. And I have seen 6 or 7 post-phrase patients developing carcinoma hepatopancreas, and all of them having this particular area untouched.
Uncinate.
A large stone in the uncinate area. I think I have uploaded one video of phrase procedure in YouTube without voiceover. I think this C loop, your C, no, you have told about a C where there is a stone. I have opened that C and demonstrated how far we can go in that phrase procedure. I think clearing the stone has something to do with the long-term outcome of chronic pancreatitis, because the incidence of malignancy will be high in chronic pancreatitis. And if you tackle the pancreas completely, the head part completely, they're the one who gets less amount of malignant risk than those who has large stones left behind in the pancreatic head. I think your point is very valid. But pain relief has nothing to do with the stone load. I think even have you seen a patient, a chronic pancreatitis, plenty of stones, but
no pain.
Yeah,
that's the most common. See, I agree with you. It's not that once they develop pain, we don't know which one is causing the pain. So I lay open every duct, smaller ducts, take out everything. Once I go in, I do a thorough job. And I also there was an issue. We had a surgeon in Medical College who would do a 6 centimeter anastomosis, LPJ. Okay, he had a calculation. I don't know where. So he will do a 6 centimeter. He won't do anything with the head. He was general surgeon, of course, not a surgical gastroenterologist. So all the surgical gastroenterology PGs would really bawl at the surgery. This is not how you do chronic pancreatitis surgery. Anyway, times have gone. I have seen the patient suffer. So I learned the phrase at that point of time. But I also felt, after seeing some senior pancreatic surgeons, they are meticulous in dividing their side branches and taking out. So, and going all the way to the tail. I also go all the way to the tail and make sure that I have completely laid it open. One, it may be that we have done a fasciotomy on the pancreas, relieving the pressure completely. Second one is that all the ducts in which I have a doubt, I have laid open and I have completely drained. And honestly speaking, I have this bad habit of taking a X-ray after the surgery to find out whether I have left behind any stone. So I wanted to be very clear on this. What I'm doing is good and good for the patient. So far, all the patients CCP, they have remained pain-free. They have become obese. So, which is why I keep asking. I have no idea what to do with obese chronic pancreatitis patients.
Obesity is an interesting phenomenon. Yeah, I'm not seeing
Yes, one of them is working in Amrutanjan in. He's working as a security officer in Amrutanjan.
Why they are gaining weight? One, because of less pain. Because when they have pain, they will eat more. When they have pain, they will not eat. But when you do surgery, they can eat more because the stimulus will be there. They can take food. Previously, they will be having pain whenever they take any good quality meal. But after surgery, they will have less pain. That is one reason. Second reason will be after surgery, many of them will become less sedentary than their more aggressive type of behavior than what they were doing. That is the second thing. Because after you do a phrase procedure with a big incision or abdomen, these laymen are not going to do their previous job. They will do just a sedentary type of job. That is the second reason. And third reason, of course, is taking more pancreatic enzymes and more starch-rich food, the rice, which is available in our area.
So I think we had a good discussion, and we are about an hour, 15 minutes into it. And then I think there are so many take-home points regarding stricture, large ball, small ball in relation to chronic pancreatitis. And of course, there's some very interesting message from Prathapan says that tackle the pancreas same time if you can. And I think that's a good take. And of course, the technical points regarding surgery for chronic pancreatitis, especially the C cut, which Ilang was talking about, but I do not know when its patients have become happy, they become plump, and they become pain-free. Why he stopped operating, I really do not know. I think
I'm not stopped operating.
there's so many companies have come up with enzyme preparations, and they have buy one get one free, then package and all that. I think they are taking good care of you. So if no further comments, then
a good session.
I'll close the session. Thank you. Thanks, Pradhan. Thanks, Ilango, for being there. Thanks, Gautam, for a lovely presentation. We'll see you on Saturday.